Hello, I'm Chris. I'm an American living out my midlife crisis in the Netherlands. In today's video, I'm going to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his recent press conference about autism. But first, I want to say thank you. Thank you to all the people who have viewed my videos, who have liked them, who have subscribed to the channel. The response has been truly overwhelming in a very short period of time, and it just goes to show that there are a lot of like-minded people out there that are either looking for a way to get out of the United States or at least connect with people who have and try to figure out if they have a way, a path themselves to get out. And I think, if I can help one or two people, then all of this content was completely worth it. And it was totally worth it for me to spend the time to write and create and figure out how I can help a few individuals either get out of the United States and into the Netherlands or into some other country, or just connect and know that we're not alone. So thank you. I will keep creating content as long as there's people out there that are wanting to view it. Now, I know the title of this video is RFK and Autism and Trump's continued attack on the American people, but I'd really like to start with something personal first. And I think the reason is because what RFK had to say, it really hits home. And what I mean by that is last year I discovered that I am in fact autistic. And I discovered this right before we moved to the Netherlands, like literally while we were packing the house up and selling things. And I just didn't have time to unpack it. I didn't have time to look at it. Um, and so I just kind of put it on hold and decided that once we got settled in the Netherlands, that I would do some unpacking and I would do some learning and figuring out exactly what it meant. And so I'm definitely what they call a late diagnosed autistic. I was 46 at the time when I found out. I'm 47 and about to be 48 now. And, you know, it was kind of like, well, now what? Like, what does this actually provide? Like, how can I learn from this? And, I'd like to think I'm middle aged now and, going through my midlife crisis. But, the track record in my family is not that people get to live to be 90 plus. So I'm not entirely sure if that's going to be the case, but anyway, I think living in the Netherlands and in Europe in general will definitely extend what life I have left. And my kids were really the ones who discovered it for me, if you will. One day they literally just said to me, "Dad, we think you're autistic," and I was like, "No," and they were like, "Yeah, we're pretty sure that you are. But here's some tests and here's some quizzes, and you can take them and figure out if you are, and let us know." And this all came because they were diagnosed along with my wife the year or so before, and so they were familiar with what some of the autism signs were, and they were kind of high on their radar at the time, and I definitely fit some of the characteristics. So I got on my computer and I took the quizzes and I took the tests and I looked at different YouTube videos and articles and things like that. And sure enough, it was not even like a question. Every single test said you were 100% autistic. There is no question at all that this is a trait of yours. And looking back, I think uh, things really came into focus for me. My childhood really came into focus. A lot of the things that I struggled with in my life started to really make sense because I had this disability that I didn't know about and couldn't make accommodations for. And so it was a lot actually, eye opening to discover that I was autistic. And thinking back to my childhood, like I remember one story in particular that my parents like to tell a lot, and that was that I didn't talk until I was 3 years old. And they even took me to the doctor several times for it, and the doctor was like, no, everything's fine. He can talk. He just chooses not to. So, just give him time and I'm sure it'll all come around and it's no big deal. And I have an older sister. She's 3 years older than me. And so she liked to talk a lot. And so the doctor thought, oh, well, maybe it's just because his sister likes to talk a lot and he really doesn't have much to say. And so he just chooses to stay silent. But then my parents went on vacation and they left me with some cousins of mine. And my sister stayed with some different cousins of mine. And what they discovered when I got back is that I was talking in full sentences like, hey, mom, dad, how was your trip? And they were just looking at me like, where did you come from? You've literally never said anything, in your whole life. And here you are speaking sentences. And, the joke was that I had a week or 10 days or whatever it was away from my very talkative sister. And so that's why I started talking all of a sudden. But in unpacking my autistic diagnosis, I realized that that was not actually the case. That the the real story there was that I had developed and worked out a code system with my mom about what I needed. And so whatever that was, whether I needed water or food or to go to bed, which I like to sleep a lot, we had a system for all of it. Then all of a sudden, for a week plus, she wasn't there, but I still needed things. I still needed to go to the bathroom and to have dinner and, have a snack or whatever it is that 3 year olds need. And I found that I could only use my words to be able to get what I needed. And probably, if I'm really thinking about it, now I don't remember back when I was 3, but it's probably more likely that I was, using my nonverbal skills and my cousin was like, what do you need? And finally I just had to say exactly what I needed, which I'm sure was a very difficult thing at the time and probably involved a lot of tears. I've also had a lot of sensory challenges over the years, everything from clothing materials to Play-Doh when I was a kid. Oh, I absolutely hated Play-Doh. Sand on my feet at the beach was one of the worst things that I could experience. And textures of things that I ate was really important to me and still is. It's still definitely a trigger for me in terms of like I either really like this or I really don't like this. And there's not a whole lot that's in between. And I remember that jeans were a big deal. Like I absolutely despised wearing jeans. They were so uncomfortable and restrictive. And so like I wore these like black kind of khaki pants for years and years until I got into high school and then I realized that that was super uncool and so I would have to wear jeans. And so I figured out a way to wear jeans and it was thankfully the 90s so everything was kind of oversized and baggy, which I think really helped with being able to transition into wearing jeans. I still don't like restrictive clothing. I remember that I wore socks all the time, like even to bed. And I think that's not necessarily a typical thing that happens with kids, but I think part of it was we had these hardwood floors that got so cold that I just didn't want my feet, my bare feet, to be stepping on these hardwood floors. And the heating in our house didn't work very well, and so it was just always this kind of sensory thing for me with socks, and I always wanted to have socks on unless it was like a crazy hot day, which didn't happen very often where we lived. And then later when I was almost a teenager, I discovered music and headphones and I absolutely loved it. I had my Walkman and my headphones and I would just get lost for hours and not pay attention to anything going on around me in the world. And I think that was kind of an early way for me to kind of check out and get the me time, the recovery time that I needed. I was also bullied really bad. It was a terrible experience growing up, being a target for kids, and I think that a lot of autistic kids, whether they're diagnosed or not, end up being the target of bullies. It's somehow obvious to kids that that autistic person is completely different from them. And so autistic people become a target. And I know this from a lot of the videos I've watched and people that I follow, in that they've all shared similar stories about how they were bullied as kids and targeted as kids. And so it's just one of those things that I think is is something that happens particularly to autistic kids. I also worked at a grocery store, and when I was like 16, I think, and I was a bagger. So there was the checker and the bagger. It doesn't You don't really find a lot of baggers these days, but if you've been around long enough, you know what a bagger was. And so that was my job at 16. And I could see that some of the checkers were struggling with memorizing and knowing certain produce codes because everything was manual by back then. You didn't have barcodes on the produce to scan it like today. And so I took it upon myself to memorize all of the 3-digit codes that we had. And I still remember a lot of them, and especially some of the obscure ones, like jicama was 256. And like that's just not that's not a typical kid behavior, and it's definitely not a typical teenager behavior to like memorize all these numbers and things that go along with them, and then help out uh, your your fellow coworkers with that. And then I remember like when I was 17 or 18, we switched to the universal 4-digit system, and that really messed up all the checkers, including the ones that have been around for a long time. And so I was the first, again, not a checker, but I was the first that memorized all the 4-digit codes. And so everyone would just look at me when they didn't know what the code was, and I would just tell them what the code was. And so it was just one of those unique things that I was really good at, and it became kind of a little special interest of mine, if you will. And so, anyway, it was just one of those stories that I remembered as I was kind of unpacking my autism. And finally, on my own journey of autism is masking. And if you're neurodivergent, you know what masking is. And this is the behavior of covering up your neurodivergent traits to appear neurotypical, or basically what society expects you to appear as. And I learned to mask at a very young age, because I quickly learned that what was going on around me was not necessarily what was going on inside of me and in my head. And I had to make a shift in order to survive and to make it through things like school and work and all those things. And where I'm going with this is that if you're a friend or a family member watching this, you're probably a little surprised by my autism diagnosis. And I totally understand that. I was extremely good at masking over the years, and really had a lot of learned traits that were kind of mirroring, which is, basically doubling what the person in front of you is doing. And I learned this pretty early on at work and as a sales tactic, and I think I adapted it to the rest of my life. And so if you if you knew me, you knew a version of me. And that is that I had my work Chris, and I had my friends Chris, and I had my home Chris, and now I'm really trying to get to a point where I have Chris, and it's just my true self. The hard part is that autism is still there's still a stigma that goes with autism, and so it's not something that everyone understands, and it's not something that everyone accepts. And so I think it's going to be an interesting journey over the next few years to try and really unmask and become who I really am. Okay, so back to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And on April 16th, he had a news conference, a press conference, about new findings from a CDC study showing that autism is growing at an enormous rate. And he specifically called it an autism epidemic. And when I saw those two words together, it literally stopped me in my tracks. I could not comprehend autism and epidemic in the same sentence. Now, if you don't know what an epidemic is, I'll put it on the screen here, but the Oxford Dictionary defines epidemic as a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community to at a particular time. And so, hello, autism is not an infectious disease. No, we do not know what the cause of autism is. We do know that there's a genetic component, but it is not being passed person to person like an infectious disease. So the fact that he even started this news conference by saying that autism is an epidemic was just absolutely mind boggling to me. Now, what we are pretty sure of is that the increase in the number of autistic kids, which is specifically what he was talking about, is like 8-year-old kids, um, is because of the expanding diagnostic criteria of what an autism diagnosis looks like. And if we expand that even further, there are a lot more people that are being diagnosed in their late teens and early 20s, and even into their 30s and 40s now. And I think that what we're seeing is that it's becoming, at least for most people, less of a stigma than it used to be. And so more people are being open about their autism. And then, like many other Trump administration folks, he immediately throws the science under the bus and he says, but it doesn't take you to read the literature, it takes a little common sense. If autism, if the epidemic is an artifact of a better diagnostic criteria or better recognition, then why are we not, say, seeing it in older people? Why is this only happening in young people? But the reality is, we are seeing it in older people. He's just not paying attention to it because he's looking at data that only looked at 8-year-olds. So frustrating. And so then he goes on to say, have you ever seen a 71-year-old nonverbal, non-toilet trained, head banging, etc., walking around the mall? And it's like, okay, first of all, that's a percentage of autistic folks that have some real struggles with what daily life looks like and struggle with, verbal processing and struggle with toilet training and things like that. And so he's kind of making fun of it in a way which I really struggle with, but he's also taking a generation that, if you did not conform to society, like a 71-year-old did not conform to society, you basically ended up in an asylum and you had no choice. You conformed to society or they did something to you. And a lot of these autistic kids that are older, in their, say, 70s and 80s, they they were physically punished for not being quote unquote normal. And that's a terrible time to look back on and say, here's these neurodivergent folks, these autistic folks, and they were they were treated so poorly. So I mean, these older generations, they had no choice but to adapt to society. And today there's more choices, there's more options. You can do your special interest on YouTube and actually make a living. Like, there are lots of different ways that you can make money and go to work and be a so-called functioning member of society. Like, I mean, I was in the wine industry for a long time, and I know I ran across a lot of autistic people in the wine industry that their special interest was wine. Like, you wanted to sit there and for hours have a conversation about wine, you absolutely could with any number of people in the industry. And it wasn't just because they liked wine a lot. Like, there was more to it than that. But here are the two things that really got me. And again, I'll throw the quotes up on the screen. But, he said, this is a preventable disease. We know it's from environmental exposure. And genes do not cause epidemics. Now, the first quote is clearly a lie. Like, nobody has proven that autism comes from environmental exposure. Also, it's been around for generations. So the likelihood that previous generations were exposed to exactly the same environmental issue as current generations is kind of just ludicrous when you think about it. And so if you critically think about what it is he's saying, it's absolutely false. But like many people in this administration, he spoke it like facts. And there's a lot of people that are going to believe exactly what he says. There's already been a bunch of articles since his press conference that have basically debunked all of the things that he's said. He's also going to be funding some new studies, and that he expects those results of the studies to be done by September of this year. So 5 months from now. I don't know if you know anything about autism, but people have been researching for decades, and he thinks that all of a sudden he's going to have information in 5 months. In addition, he says genes do not cause epidemics. Well, yeah, actually, that's that's true. Genes don't cause epidemics because what you're talking about, autism, cannot be an epidemic. It doesn't fall under the epidemic definition. So what is he trying to do? Here's my thought. I think he's trying to figure out a way to segment this population. And it's exactly what Hitler did in the pre-World War II era, where some of the first people that he went after were people with disabilities, and both mental and physical, and autism was definitely a part of that. And all the kids went through some testing, and basically the ones that didn't pass the test, they were sent to a place where they could reform. And if that didn't happen, they were sent to a children's ward. And I think we all know what happened to the children that were in the ward. And so I think that this is all part of a larger plan to target and segment this part of the population that, in Trump's mind and RFK's mind, and probably many other people in the administration, are not going to be functioning members of society. And so they're looking at a way to group them together so that they can quickly send them off to wherever it is they plan on sending them off to. From the very first day, this administration has been targeting groups that do not look and act like them, from LGBTQ plus to minorities to women, and now autistics. And my guess would be that other neurodivergent folks are right behind when it comes to what this administration is trying to do. So if you live in the United States and you are neurodivergent of some sort, or have kids that are neurodivergent of some sort, I would urge you to keep an eye on what is happening with this particular issue and how the administration is handling it, because I really think that this is a dangerous time for people. Like any time that this administration spends on a particular group, we should be really paying attention to what that particular group is and what it means in their eyes if that group disappears or is outcast in some way. And I think it's definitely possible that those countries that are already looking at legislation to let trans folks in, that they may expand that in the future and open that up uh, to other people that are being targeted by this administration. And I think that we'll just have to wait and see. I'm going to keep my eye on this issue. It is obviously very important to me. I'm still an American citizen, even though I'm not living in the United States right now. And while I'm taking steps to, become a citizen in the Netherlands, I'm still 4+ years away from that ability. And so I'm, very much paying attention to what is happening in, my home country, if you will, and particularly to issues that affect me and my family. So again, thanks for sticking around and watching this content. If you have any questions or comments, please just drop them in the comments below, and I would love to hear from you. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe, and I'll be back soon. Stay safe out there.